Hello and welcome to Wednesday Live with Evie. This is number 36 and the topic is trust and intention, or my thoughts on trust and intention. Anyway, my name's Evie Burke. If you're not familiar with me, I work with entrepreneurs, primarily women, and I help them take their productivity to a new level. And a couple of things I want to share with you before we go ahead and get started with the topic is, if you haven't already gone over to the website and got your copy of How to Choose Priorities When Everything is Important, head over there and grab that. It's a really great tool to use for two different reasons, or two different situations. One is you have a lot of stuff going on, it's all in your head, and it's overwhelming. You don't quite know what to work on next. Head over there, get the tool. It gives you a way to dump out all of that information into one place, and then it gives you a way to prioritize the things that you want to be doing. And then the second reason that you should download that is if you're trying to be more productive and you don't have one spot where all of the things that you need to or want to be doing are. So whenever you have like 4 different spots that your to-do list is in, it makes it really overwhelming for you to know what to do next, because there's so many places it lives, especially if one of those places is in your own head. So head over there and grab that. It'll again give you a great way to get all of that down in one spot, and then you only have one place to look to for what needs to get done and one place to add things that need to get done, instead of a bunch of places that you're perpetually trying to remember what they are and where they are. All right, and number 2 thing here is, if you aren't a member of the Facebook group, Productivity for Women Entrepreneurs, head over to that and join that. It is the group linked with my Facebook page. So if on the Facebook page, if you're on the desktop site and you choose groups from the left, I think it's in the top tabs. If you're on mobile, then you can find that group and you can join that. It's a great place to go for some support. I hear from people all the time where they say, I don't always post when you ask what is your most important thing to get done this week, but it makes me think about it, and that makes me get more done. So head over there and take a look at that, join that group. And then last but not least is, if you are somebody that needs a little more accountability, you're looking for a small community to support you and be there for you and bounce ideas off of, I have a productivity mastermind group. I have a mastermind group that meets weekly via Zoom, and there's still some spots available there. We end in February, and you can join now still, and it's just a really great place to be if you are somebody who's looking for support, accountability, and to be that support and accountability for other people. So masterminds are great things. If you have any questions about any of those, or you want any more information about any of those, just let me know to contact you in the comments below, and I'll reach out to you via a private message, and we can connect that way and talk about what it is that you are looking for, what you need right now. So before I go ahead and get started with our topic for today, let me just share this Facebook Live into the event so that people who are there can find it. So just bear with me for 1 minute. And going forward, if you see me looking over to the left, my left, I know this is mirrored, so it might be your right, but anyway, looking over that way, this is also where my notes are. So I'm just checking my notes, and I will definitely be doing that at times for this one, just because I'm using a couple of quotes and I want to make sure I get them right. So, as you know from earlier, today's topic is thoughts on trust and intention. So if you got my newsletter on Monday, then you know the story of where this came from. And if you didn't, I'm going to share it so you're not missing out on anything. So on Sunday, so I listen to podcasts a lot. I listen to them in the car when I'm going places, and sometimes I listen to them at home, whether I'm, making breakfast or lunch or dinner or getting ready in the morning. If my husband isn't around, I'm probably listening to a podcast or watching something on YouTube. And so Sunday afternoon, I was coming home from church by myself. Nate had to stay at church for a little bit longer, so I was coming home from church, and I was listening to a podcast. It was The Good Life Project that's hosted by Jonathan Fields, and it is one of my favorite podcasts. I love how Jonathan Fields approaches podcasts and the way that he interviews people, and he has great guests on. Anyway, so I was watching that podcast, listening to that podcast, and his guest was Nilofer Merchant, who, again, I had never heard of, but it was a great conversation. And so I'm heading home from church, listening to this podcast, and she was talking about how sometimes it's really hard to have conversations with people about things that are that we really believe, we have like deep beliefs in, or we've already made decisions about, and somebody else has a very different viewpoint. And sometimes it's really difficult to have conversations where they're helpful, where we're actually able to be curious about why does somebody else believe what they believe when we're so firmly in what we believe. And she talked about just what it is that allows you to have some of those conversations. And as she was talking about it, she kind of expanded it a little bit. And she mentioned that for a book she had just written, she had interviewed Carol Dweck. And I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce her name. And if you aren't familiar with Carol Dweck, so she wrote this book. I wasn't planning on jumping up and getting it, but here we go. So it's going to not have it flipped right. But she wrote this book, Mindset. And Carol Dweck is as far as I know, she is the person who kind of came up with the idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And I'm not going to jump into that today. If you're interested in it, you can Google it. You'll find lots of stuff on it if you don't know about it already. But she came up with this idea of a fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And the question that Nilofer, Jonathan's guest, had for Carol was, what's the thing that's going on in someone's head to be able to have a growth mindset? What's that internal conversation? And Carol Dweck, after being excited somebody was asking her this question, because nobody had asked her this question before, Carol Dweck shared that, and again, this is a quote, "The conversation you're having with yourself is, I trust myself enough that if I fail at it, if I lose at it, if I don't get it right the first time, I trust myself enough to recover." And when Nilofer was kind of breaking that down a little bit, she brought up this question that, it really comes down to this question. And again, I quote, "How do you trust that even if it doesn't work out, that it's okay?" So she said that, and I went, oh, that's great. And at the same time in the podcast, Jonathan's like, oh, I have to think about that one for a minute. That's pretty deep. I need to think about it. And I paused the podcast. I was kind of processing it. And I ended up doing an impromptu Facebook Live on my personal page. You have to be my friend to see it over there, but just kind of processing that a little bit. So if you do find it, if you're my Facebook friend and you find that that Facebook Live, that's within 5 minutes of me hearing it, and it's just me kind of working through what I heard and how it hit me. So, but what it really got me thinking about was how often in the self-help world, or even in the solopreneur space, that we hear certain beliefs and certain thoughts that sometimes, to me, they feel incomplete. And as I was thinking about this some more after I kind of wrote out my notes, I realized something that I think is also pertinent here. And I think that, well, I know that we hear things from where we are, and we also say things from where we are, right? So if somebody has spent a lot of time with, in the self-help world, a lot of time working on themselves, and let me preface this by saying this isn't a judgment. This is not meant to come across as a judgment. This is an observation. But they'll say something from, like, let's say this level, and if we're not here, we're not going to hear it. Like, if we're not at this location, at the same level of understanding that they are, we're not going to hear it here. We're going to hear it where we are. So maybe we're going to hear it here. And sometimes that doesn't make a difference. Sometimes I think it causes a misunderstanding. So that's where my problem, so to speak, with a couple of commonly held thoughts or beliefs are, with a couple of commonly held thoughts or beliefs, because I know especially after hearing this and having this new understanding that came from thinking about this topic of, do I trust myself enough that if this doesn't go the way I expect it to, that I'm going to be okay? Oh yeah, Rochelle? So after hearing, if I trust myself enough that regardless how this works out, that I'm going to be okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But okay, so the two things that the two thoughts that I want to reframe a little bit are the one where trust that everything's going to work out. So you'll hear this a lot, just trust that everything's going to work out. Leap and the net will appear, that type of thought process. And I have a little bit of a problem with those as they're worded, and I'll go into that in a minute. And then the other one is, when you're in the self-help, when you're in the solopreneur world, you'll hear a lot about setting intentions. And you'll hear that when you set an intention that you shouldn't be attached to it. And it's one of those things that I've sometimes I get, sometimes I don't get, but it's like, well, if I'm setting an intention, it's something that I want to happen, so aren't I inherently attached to that outcome? So how do I set an intention without being attached to it? And this thought, this idea from Carol Dweck really gave me a new layer of understanding to both of these things. So let's talk about that. So first, let's go into the trust that everything is going to work out. So, this isn't a bad idea. I agree with it. The problem is, I think a lot of times people add unconsciously a little bit to the end. And that completely changes what it actually means. So instead of it just being trust that everything is going to work out, I think a lot of times people add unconsciously trust that everything is going to work out the way you want it to. And that the way you want it to being added to the end completely changes the definition. So depending on where you are, you might or might not add that little bit consciously or unconsciously to that statement. And again, though, it completely changes what it means. So If you're trusting that things are going to work out the way you want them to, you're just putting blind faith in, this is going to work out the way I want it to. I'm going to jump, the net's going to appear, and everything's going to work out exactly the way I want it to, and everything's going to be great. And that's not actually what this means. When you take it, when you add that little bit that Nilüfer shared from Carol Dweck, where for that fixed versus growth mindset, where you really need to trust that regardless of how it works out, you're going to be okay. That so in this case, when things work the way you want them to, or let me back up, that when you trust that everything is going to work out, you trust that I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to move toward that decision. And I'm also going to trust in myself enough to know that I'm going to be okay if that thing doesn't work out the way that I anticipated. And so the leap and the net will appear. It's trusting that whether it works out the way I expect it to or not, that I am going to be okay, right? So do you see that difference in interpretation of trust that everything's going to work out versus trust that everything is going to work out the way you want it to? How much more power and self-confidence and I don't know what else to say about it, that there is in the I'm going to trust that everything is going to work out, where you're also trusting that regardless whether it works out the way you expect or not, that you're going to be okay, versus I'm going to trust that everything's going to work out the way I want it to. Do you see that difference? So now let's talk about the next one. The second one I mentioned. The second belief, or the thought, the idea, so to speak, that you need to set an intention and not be attached to it. And when I heard what Carol's thought, or what Carol said about, the difference between the growth and the fixed mindset, what's going on in the head, and I started thinking about setting intentions without being attached to them, it was another aha moment, right? Because again, Rochelle says the latter can bring disappointment, right? When you're working with something, this is, I'm guessing, for what I was just talking about, when you're expecting everything to work out the way you want it to, and then it doesn't, then you're like, oh, didn't I do everything that I was supposed to do? What did I do wrong? And you need to look at maybe why it worked and what didn't work, and how you can adjust going forward. But at the same time, know that you're going to be okay and you can move through it. So going back to setting intentions without being attached to them is, when you add this observation by Carol Dweck about trusting that regardless of what happens, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to continue on, right, the next day. So you set the intention while you're also trusting yourself enough that if you fail, if it doesn't work out, if it doesn't go right, you're trusting in yourself enough to recover. So you trust that even if it doesn't work out the way that you planned, it's okay. And so I've seen people kind of talk around these ideas, but not really talk about them directly, right? Where the words to really flesh this out haven't come a lot when I've heard other people talk them. So they kind of talk around the idea. And I think when you add this observation by Carol Dweck, it really solidifies what it means here. Where you're setting an attachment and you're not being attached to it, where yes, I want this to happen. And at the same time, I trust that whether or not this thing happens, this intention that I've set, that whether or not that intention works out, I'm going to be okay. That I'm a strong enough person that I'm going to be okay. And it also got me thinking about something one of the previous guests on the Good Life program or podcast had said, and I can't reference that one. I'll give you the link to the Nilifer one at the end, but I can't remember where this one came from. But there was a previous guest on Jonathan's podcast where he had talked about people who have overcome a huge adversity tend to be more successful. They tend to take more risks and be willing to, just try out more things and see what works and what doesn't and be okay with it than somebody who hasn't had that experience. And as I was thinking about what Nilifer said Carol Dweck had mentioned, that makes complete sense because they have gone through, a big adversity and they've come through on the other side, right? It's been okay. It worked out however it ended up working out and they were okay. So they have this innate knowing in themselves that I've already been through hell. So whatever happens with this other thing that I'm trying, whether it works out or not, I know I can take care of myself. And I don't know that fearless is necessarily the right word to describe it because I think there can still be some fear involved, but they're more able to work through that fear or work in spite of the fear anyway because they already have this innate knowing that they're going to be okay based on their previous experiences, right? So they have a belief based on their past experiences that it'll be okay whether it works out or not. And I think for many of us who don't have that experience of, going through some hellish experience, we have to cultivate that confidence, that not okayness, but we have to cultivate that I'm going to be okayness in ourselves versus having a big, huge experience that we can pull from. So we pull from instead, the other things that we've done that have worked out okay for us, whether or not they actually worked out. Does that make sense? So how does this apply to your business? Hopefully you kind of innately understand that, how this applies to your business. But basically it's when you are setting an intention or a big goal for yourself and you're trying to not be attached to it, just look into, am I going to be okay whether this works out or not, right? Can I trust in myself enough that I can trust that I'm going to be okay even if I don't meet that income goal, even if I don't have that number of clients, even if that program doesn't work out for me, am I going to be okay? Can I trust in myself enough to know that I'm going to be okay regardless of what happens in that situation or with that intention? Can I trust in myself enough to know even if this doesn't work out, that I'm going to be okay? That I'm going to wake up tomorrow or after whatever event and I'm going to be okay. So, what do you guys think? So I know there's a couple of you here live. So what do you guys think? Did I miss an important nuance? Do you agree or do you disagree? Maybe there's a nuance that I didn't touch on that you would like to bring up or like me to touch on. I'd love to know that. While you're doing that, I am going to share a couple of links. So the first one I'm going to share is to my website. So if anybody does want to grab how to choose priorities when everything is important, they can do that. And yeah, the resilience. That's not the link I want. Here's the link to Nilüfer's. Good Life Project. All right. So hopefully that, there we go. All right. So Rochelle had mentioned it makes it easier to be more resilient if you had a past event or a failure, but it's still scary. Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's again, when you have that past event to pull on, it doesn't make the fear go away, but I think there's Brene Brown sometimes talks about, maybe it wasn't Brene Brown, maybe it was another, I listen to a lot of podcasts, so sometimes people smush in my head, but there's a conversation happening right now around grit, and so I think there's a little more of that, where there's a little more grit, where, you know, you're willing to try it. I don't think that's Brene's word. I'm not going to spend it. I'm looking at my bookshelf to see if the book titles of Brene Brown's books kind of gives me an insight as to what her term is. Maybe it's grit. I don't remember, but I know that there's this conversation right now that people are having around grit, and you know, are you willing to have the grit to kind of work with something and see it out, but without having the stupid grit where you're just stubbornly trying to see something through, versus recognizing, you know what, this isn't working, and so I'm going to go and try something else. But I think that still ties into this whole concept that Carol Dweck talks about with trusting yourself, where it's also trusting yourself to let something go when you've tried it enough, and trust that you can let it go and you're still going to be okay. Let's see. I saw Stephanie said something. So Stephanie said, yeah, not being attached to the outcome seems very difficult when it's something that you really want. And it does. I was talking with Trisha Dunn, and she's been a coach in the past, and she works with helping people with homeschooling, whether they're deciding whether to go into homeschooling, and you know, she can help them make that decision, or if they're trying to figure out how to work with the schools on special things that are needed. Hi, Trisha. So I was talking with her Monday, and I wrote down what she said, and so I'm not going to remember it exactly, but she talked about, you know, there's a difference between the intention and sometimes the expectation, where you can, and she used the example of, you know, the intention that the child is going to make it through the night without wetting the bed. I believe that was the example that she used. And so you can set that intention and at the same time be prepared if the child does wet the bed, right? So you can have the intention and, you know, really want that to happen, and at the same time set yourself up so if that's not what happens, you're okay. You know, you work through that. Yeah, the anticipation versus the expectation. That's what she said. So you can anticipate that this is what you want to happen versus the expectation of what you expect to happen. So yeah, I thought that was a really insightful comment from a conversation I had with Trisha the other day. So yeah, it can be really hard to not be attached to something. And I think it's kind of one of those lines where you set, if you set an intention and you're trying not to be attached to it, you also still want to do everything, right, to make sure that that thing happens. And I think sometimes, I know for myself in the past when I've set something up where I'm like, okay, I intend for this to happen, and in my effort to not be attached to it, I don't do everything that I can for that intention to come to fruition but I'm not attached to it. So, I'm going to be hands off on this part of it because I'm not attached to it. So there's this fine line sometimes, I think, between setting an intention and doing all of our work toward having that thing happen, and not being attached to the outcome. So play with what would change for you when you're setting an intention if you also looked at, how am I going to be okay if this doesn't happen? I'm going to go back to a quote, how Nilifer said it. Where is it? I'm looking through my notes here. How do you trust that even if it doesn't work out, it's okay? And I think this also can get to, okay, I'm not going to say that just because I don't have that thought through enough in my head to share it in a way that is coherent. So I'm going to keep that one to myself. But when you're setting an intention or even a goal, how do you trust that even if it doesn't work out, it's okay? Keeping that in mind too, this is my intention, and can I trust, what is the work I need to do for myself to be able to trust that even if this doesn't work out, I'm going to be okay, right? So play with that. What would change with the way that you set intentions, or the way that you set goals, or the way that you handle things not working out the way you expect them to, if you trusted that even if it doesn't work out, it's okay? So this might be something you want to journal about. What would that look like for you? What would change in your business or in the way that you set goals or set intentions if you trusted that even if it doesn't work out, it's okay? I think I'm going to leave it there. I know we're over a half hour now, so thank you for the love, Trisha. I appreciate that. If you want to talk about this one-on-one, reach out to me. Just, again, mention in the comments, hey, PM me, and, I'll reach out to you, and then we can take the conversation from there, whether it's you want to talk a little bit more about how this applies for you, or anything else that I mentioned at the beginning that you want some more information about. Whatever it is, just say, hey, PM me, and I'll reach out to you. So it's not, one more thing on your to-do list. I'll take that responsibility and reach out to you just to make it a little easier for you if you need a little more support or thought around anything that we talked about today. So that is it for today. So this was Wednesday Live with Evie, number 36, I believe. And those were my thoughts on intention and trust. I will see you next week. Much love, everybody. Bye.